costume and then they go out on patrol because they believe they're going to do right with what they just got. Marvel characters get their powers, they're not really sure what to do with them. They try to live a normal life and then everybody comes after them. So the problems come to them, they're not going out looking for the problems. DC characters go out and look at problems. And I thought that was a unique difference between the two. And every time we tried to turn a DC character into a Marvel character, give them the problems, it never worked. I said that's what broke Hal Jordan in my mind. When people tried to, I couldn't understand Hal Jordan, they tried to make him an alcoholic for a little while, remember that bit? They tried to make Hal Jordan an alcoholic, and I said, how can Hal Jordan be an alcoholic if he has this incredible willpower that feeds this ring? You know, how does he have that strength of will to feed a ring, to create all these crazy things and fly around the universe and not be strong enough to control himself? And it didn't seem connected. Question? No. Okay, good. Get close. But that's Spider-Man. So I always look at things like that about what makes them work. You can't put the problems of the world on a Superman or a Wonder Woman because they're better than that, and they don't sit well. So therefore, if you want to explain who they are, then we have to look at what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then it gets interesting, you know, because then it's about everybody fighting for the greater good. What's your greater good, you know? And this ultimately got us to where we got to Infinite Crisis. What's the greater good? The greater good, you look at it and go, if the universe there's a giant war in the outer space and that war is ultimately going to make it to our world, do we stop that fight? If there's this mystic being that's going to create a rift in reality that hell's going to come out onto Earth, do we stop that fight? Or if there's villains in the neighborhood where my family are threatens, do I stop that fight? Where do I put my energies? What do I do? And once you figured out what the purpose for each hero was, about where their priority was, it allowed us to put them in situations where they might be in conflict with each other. Not just bickering, but more philosophical conversation about what's most important to me and how do we protect what I love and what I believe in, even if mine means put it a priority over your concern. And it's something you see in the world today that it's great to tell that allegory through the characters and the stories, because ultimately as you see people pulling apart and just yelling at each other and shouting at each other, not listening, you realize that everybody feels they're right. And in their own minds they believe they're right. So how do we find it in between? How do we find a way to make things work? So we started to do that with Identity Crisis and started to show what the moral decisions of each of our heroes were and put them in conflict. And because it was one of our characters was so good at this, it really challenged everybody at their moral core. And the more that we can explain our characters, the better they can be, the more rich they can be. So that was an interesting book for us, and it was very dramatic to do, but it got us on a path to start to look at how we can really dig in deeper. And that's when I used to sit with Jeff Johns, who had a list of things he loves. And the thing about Jeff is, I don't think there's a single person that understands the DC universe better than him, without a doubt. He just understands those characters inside and out, how they act and behave and breathe. He understands them really at a very personal level. Even in the understanding level that's so personal, it's things that never even appeared on a page. It's how he understood them to be. So when he came onto those books, he was able to find a way to really reinvent them in a way that was so exciting, because he was telling stories that were so consistent with the characters, yet brand new. Does that sound right? Anybody? Any Jeff Johns fans here? What do you like the best out of his stuff? Yeah.
I like how he brought Hal Jordan back without, frankly, crapping on what came before.
Right.
Which I always felt in the Emerald Twilight thing, you didn't need to tear down what went before to bring Kyle Rayner in, but that's what was chosen to be done.
Right.
When Jeff brought Hal back, he brought him back and then wove all that stuff into this great tapestry that went forward without tearing down anything that was before.
That's great. Ivan Cohen's here right now. Now, Ivan was one of the editors during this period of time. I'm going through those early days, Ivan, so you're going to have to basically call me out if I'm saying anything right or wrong, okay?
Whatever you say is right, Bob.
But absolutely correct, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Green Lantern Rebirth worked so well. And that was one of those things that he was able to see every little bit, even explain how got the white temples, which was, I mean, it was that level of detail that I think made such a difference to that story. Any Identity Crisis fans in here at all? Anybody here? What'd you think of that?
Yeah, it was really strong. You know, the mystery element I thought has continued to work in DC's favor, because nobody really understood the murderer's motivation, and so the conflicts that came out were more procedural than they were confusion.
Right.
So as far as how the characters work within the DC universe now, you know, Batman became more of an outlier than he was before Identity Crisis. And I think that bringing Meltzer into the writing staff, or however you describe it, every time that he's returned to comics, I think he's brought that same integrity to it.
Yeah, I think what was great about that book in particular was that he wrote all of the scripts all together. So we didn't even start drawing it until the whole thing was written out, which was really good, because you can, as an artist, they can see how this is being paced to know so they know what to call out if it's important later on. You know what I mean? So there's a way to create a book that's much more compelling, because of the fact that you're doing it in a way that you know what all the key beats are. So you know where the action scene should be, you know where the quieter scene should be, you know what the emotional scene should be that'll play out later on. So that's what's really good about that. You know, one of the biggest problems we have with comics is that we're hand to mouth. You know, we're doing everything so fast, and getting it out the door, and you're rushing to beat the schedule. And I think because of that, we have problems, because ultimately you don't have time to fix it, or somebody's not doing their best work because they're rushing it out at the last minute. And that's something we're always trying to fix, and whether we get there or not, we'll see, but it's something we're always trying to fix. But that's it. So we did Identity Crisis, and that's when we get to Countdown to Infinite Crisis, which was really a 3-year plan. It was, we laid out 3 years worth of publishing at one time, where this is all going, what type of stories we're going to tell, what's going to happen over here. Hey, the hell are you? You're not intrusive at all. I was going to say that, so subtle. Without the flash, I wouldn't have known you were there.
I used to try to sneak in, never worked.
Never worked.
Now I just go barrel in.
Well, they're fine.
And they leave.
There you go. Exactly. But what was interesting, we laid out a full storyline about all this, and it was going back to what I was saying before about if there's an attack on the mystic realm, if there's an attack in outer space, if there's an attack from the governments in the world, or there's an attack on your neighborhood. If I'm a hero, where do I go first? What do I lean on first? What do I try to defend? Batman goes, I'm going to defend Gotham, and Superman's going, wait a minute, I need you up here. Outer space is in flames. He goes, no, but Gotham is where I live. And we wanted to see what happened if we created a rift between Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman. And the idea that all three of them chose a different thing, that they didn't get along, and that they had different points of view. And because they're so important to the DCU, we played it as if mommy and daddy were fighting, and how all the kids got upset, and all the heroes didn't feel right, because if these three weren't in unison and working as a team and being that inspiration to the heroes themselves, how does everybody else react? And you start to see the rifts that used to develop across the DCU. It's kind of fun. It was a lot of work and a lot of coordination. You know, and it's interesting for me now, because I guess why I'm reminiscent is that, and I've mentioned this in a couple of interviews, so I can say it here. We're building this timeline for the DC universe. Okay, we actually haven't, but we built a timeline for the DC universe. And what we did is we looked at, it's not the same, okay, you guys have been here since 0 Hour probably, right? Everybody, pretty much anybody here? We all know 0 Hour, right? In 0 Hour they built this timeline that basically showed from the dawn of time to today into the future about where the comics and where the heroes would be. For us, we're actually looking at something that's really more in line with the publishing, about how we've been publishing and where these characters were introduced and how these stories would match. Because we saw that one of the great misgivings of New 52, which was a huge success for us sales-wise, but strangely didn't connect with our core fan base, because they felt that there were certain aspects of the stories that were exercised out that they thought they loved and needed, and they felt a disconnect. The real problem with New 52 was poor planning. Poor planning. What I'm saying there is that what happened was that we planned out the first year, but we didn't plan out past that. You know? And what happened was they thought those first storylines out, but as they then started to introduce new ideas and new characters, or even worse, bring back old characters, they didn't know how they fit in, and in some ways they were moving so fast that they didn't really try to fit them in. They just used them. And that's why the stories got very confusing, because I didn't understand, well, if this character came back, but he was associated with 4 other characters, and those 4 characters didn't come back, then how does this make any sense? And once you start doing that, everything starts to unravel. So we figured if we built a timeline, that would become our base for our storytelling, so that we have a better sense of what's going on in DCU. And we got our fingers crossed, but we think this is going to lead to bigger and better things for us in the next couple of years by having what would ultimately be a consistent Bible that everybody works from. So we're all starting from the same place.
I believe that what Bendis is doing with the Superman books is very consistent with having a map that's going to be comprehensible. It's going to address the core fans. It's also going to be able to, as a publisher moving forward, remain consistent. Yeah,
and it's interesting for us because the reason why we're doing this is if you're following things like what's going on with Bendis' books, the reintroduction of Legion, or what Scott's doing with the reintroduction of Justice Society, and then if you're following Doomsday Clock, you go, wait a minute, this isn't lining up exactly right. The answer is it will. Ultimately, we got to get there. The problem is the schedule on Doomsday Clock's been off, so it's been hard to organize around it. So once we know that it completes, we'll come together. Are we having any Doomsday Clock fans in the room? Doomsday Clock? What do you think of it so far?
I think it's
Solomon Grundy?
No, yes, I am.
Okay.
Thanks for getting that right, Tim. Well, I'm not pretty much on and off with comics, but I think it's a pretty solid story.
What pulled you to that story? What are you liking about it?
Well, just word of mouth, really.
Okay, that's good. Other Doomsday Clock fans? Here, right there.
So what got me hooked initially was the fact that the Watchmen were coming back, but the last issue where, Dr. Manhattan sees this like timeline in flux, I'm sitting there wondering, is this going to have some long-term impact? And I think you just sort of answered that.
Yeah, the thing is for us right now is that the schedule's a little bit, so what's going to happen is it'll impact, and then there'll be repercussions that'll play out as we start to really pull things together. So it's a long-term plan that I see playing out through all of 2020, which I think is exciting to me because whenever I see these things, rather than look at frustrations, we look at story. See what can get a story out of this, so I think we get some really good story coming out over the next few months out of these things. Anyone else? Anything?
Well, I'm glad that it was not there were not spin-offs on it.
Yeah.
Because the delays have not worked the entire publishing schedule for DC.
Yeah.
So even though there have been delays, it's running itself as a story very well, and I'm more willing to wait for the books.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear that because I feel that the books like that it's such a unique vision. It's hard to rush, and more importantly, you can't get anybody to fill in. You sort of got to roll with the flow on that, and that's sort of what we're doing with that series as well. But the Bendis things, I feel like it's finally starting to hit the ground, and I think with the Legion introduction of Legion, I think you're going to see he's going to be taking that into some fun places, which is
well, Bendis has done a great job not only staying on schedule, but putting on that product that the story continues to move forward.
Yeah.
So it's almost a contrast between, he's got to wait on Doomsday Clock too.
Yeah, exactly. And what we've got, and it's interesting because we have a lot of really high-end talent right now. You have Bendis on Superman, you've got Tom King on Batman, you've got Scott Snyder on Justice League, you've got Jeff with Doomsday Clock and Shazam, you've got Grant Morrison on Green Lantern. So a lot of our key franchises are really covered with a lot of these guys, but they're all moving stories in separate ways. And our goal is to try to find a center that brings everybody together with one big idea, one big concept. So we're working at that. What else are we reading today, guys? Anything else? I'm going to throw my story. Go for it.
Honestly, the one thing, it's great. We're the Wednesday Warriors.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think the problem, look, I love DC, always been a DC fan, but it's the lack of experiment sometimes. And I get you have to sell. I get it. But honestly, my favorite book you're putting out right now is Jimmy Olsen. It is the wildest thing I've read in a long dang time.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that.
And Lois Lane is just wonderful. Rucka is brilliant.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. It's interesting to me, and it's one of the things we just did. Okay, it's what I call a whole lot of nothing. Is we basically decided to collapse our imprints under all one logo, and
Well, I do want to. There's one huge mistake in that.
What's that?
DC Kids.
Yeah.
Here's the problem.
Okay.
Kids don't like, here's a kid's book.
Okay.
They don't like kids' books.
When-
The frustrating thing was that you did such a great job on Zoom and Ink. And I think that was the thing. I think those two imprints should have stayed that way and kept it under that thing.
Yeah. The way that breaks down, just to let you know, is the Zoom books, the 8 to 11s, will still have the kids logo on it. Have a kids logo on it, the other ones will not. They'll just have a DC logo.
Right, but see, there's kind of the problem. What was great about the labels is they broke out of that.
Yeah. The hard part for us internally is we have so much product moving all the time. There's so much product out in the marketplace. What we're trying to do is live off the DC name. So when you say about mixture and risk product, when I look at Young Animal, that was run by under Gerard Way's curation, and even what we have going on right now with Sam and with Neil Gaiman, or even the Wonder Comics that Brian's been curating too. It gives us a lot of diversity in product. And my personal risk taking, which got me in trouble on occasion, was the Hanna-Barbera stuff. We had a lot of fun with the Hanna-Barbera books. The thing is that, you know, there's like a weird curve to it. The further away you get from Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, the more risk it could take. It's just the way the company works. So therefore, we're always going to be pushing on the edges. The main guys, maybe not so much, but the other guys, we get to have some fun with. Yes, sir.
I would counterpoint with him saying you don't take risks, in that I think you take a lot of risks, and I appreciate the fact you, throughout the years, you keep on doing these different weird fringe books, like you're doing Metal Men again, you're doing...
Leave me in mainstream!
No, you know
Oh,
for
I
a
know.
fact that the fans buy the hell out of Batman.
Yep.
You look at the top 10 every month on sales,
Yep.
and there's like 5 or 6 Batman books in there, and you give fans what they want by just putting out lots of
Yep.
not called Elseworlds, but Elseworlds kind of Batman stories. But you're always trying, like when you did this stuff with the Terrifics and the Sideways and all these kind of books, you try these things a lot.
Yeah.
They typically don't resonate. I mean, they don't
I know.
sell that well. You give them a chance, they go away, but then you try something again. So I see it as you're always trying these different things, but there's kind of a rift between what fans think that they want, different things, or maybe some people do, but the sales, they just don't.
Just never line up.
Somehow.
I agree. I mean, because the thing, and to me, the risk on the fringe is the easy part.
Yeah.
You can always go out there because, if it doesn't work. But, for me, the risk you took in some ways with Grant Morrison on Green Lantern,
Yeah.
that was a great risk.
No, that's
and
a
him
lot
and
of
Liam
fun.
were just
Oh, see,
burning that book.
it's funny. I don't consider that a risk at all. When I put
No.
Yeah.
In a lot of respects, it isn't, but it is because, Grant can be out there.
Well,
There's no.
that's why you hire him.
But right, but honestly, this is some of his best work I've seen. Him and Liam are just burning.
Do you know the story about? There's a story, so I'll break into a story for a second. How Grant Morrison wound on Green Lantern. So you were there. So we went out for dinner with Grant and his wife, and it was just to have dinner because he had 2 television series going. He was very busy. He told me he's not going to write any more comics. He's exhausted. He's out of that. So I'm just having dinner, and during the dinner I go, I got to find my big problem. I can't find anybody to do Green Lantern right now. And he goes, you're great. I'm not going to do the accent anymore. But he starts going, the Green Lantern, he's a space cop, it's going to do this, it's this. And he starts naming all these things. I'm like, that's all really good. And he goes, I couldn't do it though, too busy. And we go back to eating, and we just change the subject, go to something else. 10 minutes later, okay, the 12-issue arc. And I just look over, I'm like, I guess he's doing this book. The rest of the dinner was spent talking about Green Lantern. It's that love of the characters. He loves these characters so much, he loves talking about them. But when you talk fringe, I'm having a lot of fun. What happened is we got a little muscled up with Mr. Miracle working the way it did. Mr. Miracle worked great. Tom and Mitch Jerris did a wonderful job with that book. And that's in my mind, Mr. Miracle's never really sold. And so that was kind of fun to see that. So now I've got my 2 favorite books. You're right, I am working on Metal Men, and I'm having a blast. Shane Davis is drawing the hell out of that book. And we have a new rule in place. We have 4 issues in the can already before we even premiere. So that way, we know. Exactly. So that's the new rule is to make sure we got 3 in the bag before we put a book out, because we just can't keep doing this anymore, starting and then just chasing our tail. At least we got to give ourselves some breathing space. But we got 4 in the can, and we're having a lot of fun with that, and we're taking a lot of weird risks with that book. So I'm going to be intrigued to see how people do it, because these are characters I love. But the other one, this is the fun one, which is Jeff Lemire's working with Keith Giffen on Inferior 5. And I went to Jeff and I went to Keith and I told them what I wanted was Stranger Things. The concept is supposed to be Stranger Things. So I didn't want the Inferior 5 like you saw them before. So the idea is that, the concept is behind the book is that it takes place in the 80s, like Stranger Things. It takes place post-invasion. Remember the Invasion miniseries, the big invasion story? So it takes place post-invasion, and you find out that these kids are basically in a government witness protection program. They're the kids of superheroes who got killed during invasion or lost their powers in invasion, and they've been relocated to this place, which also holds dominators and cons that basically turned on their own people, and all are hiding out in this one little town in the Midwest somewhere. So it's this really crazy idea, and then Jeff has worked the Peacemaker in as basically the police officer of it. It's just this wonderful, quirky little book. This is the stuff that gets me excited, you know. I'm not even sure. I don't know if they're going to use him or not. I mean, theoretically, he's still alive at that point, you know, so it could be. So, but there's some fun stuff there, and I love turning over those rocks to see how to find an old character and make him do it new and fun again. But that's a fun one. But
Yeah, I agree with you.
yeah, that's why I said we always try to do crazy things for this. I'd love to, you know, and the Black Label books or some of the Elseworld stuff, you get a chance to take greater risks with the other characters. I mean, our biggest hit of this year right now is Deceased. Strangely, you like that, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think, okay. Why do you like that book?
I recently started reading it, and I think just kind of seeing as far as I got to Batman's end, to where he kind of tells the Batman, like,
Yeah.
just like, this is that, I don't have any tricks up my sleeve. That hit me really hard. I think to hear Bruce say something like that, to where, like, I have nothing to do else other than to talk to him while the slow coming of death is upon me.
Yeah.
I got dark, and Batman's already dark enough, but that was really good.
Oh, that's great. See, and you know, that's always the hardest part about this job is all those other stories. You know, I was always everybody else used to yell at me because I didn't want to do Elseworlds. And the reason why I didn't want to do Elseworlds is that I said, all these things, these stories, get a chance to tell a beginning, middle, and end, you know, and really get into some depth of the character that seems in some places more interesting than what we could do on the main line. You know, and I'm always trying to figure out, how do you get that sense of excitement that you have on a miniseries? How do we do that on the main Batman book or the main title to make sure that people come back on a regular basis? You know?
I think miniseries-wise, to me personally, I've always had more attraction to those because there's so much you can do in such a small amount of time.
Yeah.
Compared to the mainstream stuff, where you kind of have to appease the overall fan base,
Right.
and not just like the dedicated comic book readers. So like a miniseries, like the Batman White Knight series.
Yeah.
Like I feel like only like, at least in my opinion, only certain like hardcore comic book Joker and Batman fans would understand that story totally.
Right.
Compared to someone who's a general fan base of like the overall DC.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why I really like Deceased, honestly, is that I always like to see how you can follow trends. Like I said, I just said Inferior 5, we're trying to capitalize on Stranger Things a little bit over here. You know, even Metal Men, the Metal Men story is playing a very weird Westworld vibe. You gotta read it to understand. But when we went to Deceased for us was our Walking Dead. You know, for all intents and purposes. I mean, they have something that's such a massive hit. People really excited about it. So it was fun for us to do something that we felt was in the zeitgeist, the type of story that people wanted to see. And that book really took off for us in a way that, honestly, was our best-selling book of the year, which is so far. It's pretty amazing if you don't count Detective 1000, you know, which is a class unto itself. Okay, I'm rambling now. Where were we? Where were we?
I think the thing with what Tom is doing on Batman, where in a way they're single issues, there's little baby story arcs,
Yeah.
where it doesn't feel like kind of a grind every month.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we had a lot of conversation off of the events. is I can spoil in this room, right? Can I spoil in this room? You don't mind, right? Yeah. So basically, Bane kills Alfred in the next to last issue, the most recent issue in Batman, and it's an interesting scene because, you know, it was originally thought to be something of a fake out, you know, but instead it turned out to be the real deal because it had such emotional resonance for that story. And not only that, but if we're going to do a major change like that, we just don't want to do it for shock value. We want to make sure it has long-term implications in the character and story. So therefore, as I say, stories create more stories. You know, it's not that it's just one big continuous story, but ideas create new ideas, and that's what builds this immersive, you know, connective universe. I think that's important to DC, that we have to have that connective tissue. If we don't have it, then we're just a series of books, and we lose what's making it unique to be DC. There's a lot of great publishers out there creating a lot of great books, but not many publishers out there that have great universes. And they're all trying to create universes, and TV shows are trying to create universes, and movies are trying to create universes. And I'm sitting there going, we got one, why don't we use it? And so a lot of what we're doing right now, a lot of 2020, is rebuilding that connective tissue. Going to all these top writers and going, hey, I know your stories are all your own. Now we got to find that connective tissue that pulls all these stories into one big theme. So I'm hoping we can get that away. Okay, question out there. Anything else? Yes?
Big Grant Morrison there. Can you comment on Multiversity 2 and Batman Black Mirror soundtrack? Or?
We talked about Multiversity 2, and it's interesting because what happened was, okay, let's talk, you want to talk reality or comic book reality? What? Both? Okay, let's do comic book reality first. Okay, comic book reality is you'll discover that the Dark Multiverse is actually Multiversity 2, the second multiverse. Okay? Because there's this entire multiverse out there. It's in a totally different place. It's a totally different world, and ultimately, it's this dark mirror image of our multiverse. So that's why it was out there, and it's creating all these problems between the two universes. In the real world, Grant was set to do Multiversity 2. He just didn't have time to do it, and then ultimately, when the Dark Multiverse was created, he felt it touched upon a lot of themes that he would have gone down, so he didn't want to be duplicative. So ultimately, he put it on the back burner for the moment. You know, with Grant, he always comes back and tells more stories. The Multiversity miniseries was something that was honestly in the making from the end of Final Crisis. He started that concept then, and he didn't realize it until probably 10 years later. So, you know, there's always a chance to get back to that at some point. You know, and that's a good part about it. These guys, they have these stories they want to tell, and if it's something they really feel strongly about, they'll find some way to get it. You know. I mean, Final Crisis actually was actually a project that Grant pitched me when I first started. The first time I met him, he pitched me Crisis in Hyper Time, and that ultimately became Final Crisis. So it's clear that these stories live on, going from that. Any other questions out there? Anybody else? Go for it.
Anything going on with the JSA?
Well, yeah, we got we just reintroduced the JSA at the last pages of the current issue of Justice League America. So they just came back. It's part of a very big overarching story that Scott Snyder's been doing. I mean, you'll see also the JSA also comes back again, but for the first time, although it comes out second time, in the Doomsday Clock story in number 12 as well. So the JSA is back on the table, and will be an integral part of a lot of things that we'll be discussing in 2020. It's one of those themes that everybody knows really well. You know, Jeff's been working on a television show with Stargirl, so he has a lot that he wants to tell with those characters in current time. But also, what I really want to explore is the JSA in the 1940s. As the idea of doing a JSA book, like Saving Private Ryan with the JSA in the board in today's lens, rather than told in the 1940s lens, is extraordinarily intriguing to me. You know, so that's something we want to do. There's a lot of good characters in there, though. Questions, else?
Well, no, it kind of also goes to the Freedom Fighters, which I've been a really big fan of. That's
that was also one of the other books that we wanted to do. We told Robert, listen, you're on another world, go crazy.
Yeah.
And he in particular has family members that shared a lot of World War II stories to him, so he had a real sense of what it was like, and he really wanted to capture some of that visceral sense of what it would like to be occupied and how do you fight your way through that and all that. But I think between him and Eddie Barrows on the art, they've been doing a beautiful, beautiful job. And that's the thing too. I think we we have to realize we gotta start letting these artists open up their storytelling a little bit more and let the stuff breathe, because it's, you want these books visually exciting. And you know, some of the black label books, either the oversized ones, the Frank Miller, or Frank Miller Year One Superman, Batman Damned. We have more books from this other book coming out called Harleen very soon. They're all done in the graphic novel, European graphic novel size, that oversized, and the pages just explode, and the artists are having a great time with it.
Well, I also want to point out, nobody's read it. Martian Manhunter is just.
That was another one of our crazy risk books. See, so you did all our risk books, okay? There you go.
But what I'm saying is, it's we do these risk books, but it's hard to be risk with, say, the print.
Yeah.
That's where the risk is.
Well, that's the reason why we have the Elseworld stories. That's where you take that shot, in that side.
But Riley Rossmo, he is not going to have a part on that book.
We just literally had a bunch of them in town for a summit, which was fun, and we did a talent summit where we actually had more artists than writers for the first time. And the reason why we did it is because we wanted to hear from them about what's working for their storytelling, what's not working for their storytelling, to allow it to open up. So I'm looking forward to some of the things they come back with. I also, one of the most interesting things you get to do working with other people is you just get a chance to watch them, especially artists. And I'm not an artist, and that can't even draw a straight line. So when I see these guys sitting in the room and doodling, it's almost like magic. They just start to take it and they run with it, and it gets bigger and bigger, and it's just wonderful to see. I find it inspiring. When we did the weekly series 52, we had Keith Gifford in the room, and we had J.G. Jones, who was the cover artist, but we wanted him to hear what was happening. And J.G. was literally sitting in the room sketching, doing all these things. And about 3 or 4 of his sketches that he did just in the conversations, what was going on, ultimately wound up becoming story. The shot with Red Tornado with the Aborigine ultimately was not part of the 52 story, but became part of it because everybody was so inspired by his art that they just jumped all over it. So it was fascinating to see. I mean, one of the most fun I ever had on a panel was one of the first panels I ever did, because I didn't know what to say, so I just kept my mouth shut. But I was sitting next to Jim Lee, and Jim would sit there and sketch. Just sit there and sketch. He had his head down, and then he'd be asked a question, and he would snap up, answer the question perfectly with a joke. Everybody laughs. It's wonderful. He puts his head back down again and goes back to sketching. Didn't break it. All I did was watch him going. I was watching him sketch. I was watching him answer. I'm going, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. I can't do the sketching part. I don't know if I can do the back and forth. And then at the end of the panel, he literally did this, and it's not what he said, but it's what it meant. He rips off the art, he hands me the paper, he goes, "Welcome to Big Leagues, kid," and walks off the stage. And I'm like, really? And I don't know what I ever did with that stupid sketch. I think I put it in a book and I lost it, but I'm like, God damn it. But anyway, that was fun. That's the fun part about this stuff. Any other questions?
What's the status on Wildcats?
The status on Wildcats was the artist wasn't available. So basically, what happened was that with the 3-4 in the rule, we were rushing so much, the book was so far behind, we decided to unsolicit the book to let them catch up. So that when we solicit it, we can go out with a regular order of books. We're really working very hard to deliver. You say Wednesday Warriors, and it's a weird expression right now, because some people, they look at it as a joke, or they look at it as antiquated, but the reality is Wednesday Warriors means that we have a commitment to putting books out on time. And if we don't put those books out on time, then we break that commitment to our strongest fan base, or our most loyal fan base. So from my standpoint, we got to get this stuff back on track. So it makes some hard decisions. We've been making some hard decisions recently, just in regards to even our collected editions, which ones we want to do, which ones we don't. How are we going to collect books? Once our archive program went away, it changed how we're putting books out, and we're putting a lot more omnibus out, which take longer to create. So that's a little weirder. So I'm trying to find a new rhythm to how we put books out, more in line with how people buy, more so than how we like to do it ourselves.
So you're between artists on the Wildcats book?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't know when that's going to.
I don't think it's going to be delayed too long.
But you have to get the new artists to get at least 3 books.
Exactly, 100%.
So that's going to be about 6 months.
Probably about that, yeah. Over 6 months. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
That's what I'm thinking.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd rather do that than put these books out erratically.
And then delay.
Exactly, and then because there's so much product out there. I mean, we're always amazed about the amount of product that's put out on a regular basis. You know, when I get my diamond charts, and I get charts for everybody, you know, there's about 500 new comics put out every month. 500. And you think about it, not to disparage anything, is there enough talent to even do 500? Is there enough talent to even do 200 new comics a month? Are we spreading ourselves out too thin? And that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of Batman, because ultimately it's what people recognize. And I always say we've become the comfort food of comic stores. There's so much stuff out there that you want to find and see, but geez, it's it's like watching all these channels on TV and all these services, and then winding up on Gilligan's Island, because at least I know how that's going to work, and at least I'm not wasting my half hour. Do you know what I mean? Yes.
It's the Wednesday Warrior thing. Click with me. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You may have noticed this. I don't know if you go out to comic shops or anything, but I tend to like more of the weird fringe stuff. Like, I am not a big fan of Bendis on Superman. Doesn't mean that it's bad,
Right.
it's just it doesn't click with me. I like Lois Lane, I like, some of these other fringe books. If I pre-order the book, which I tend to do, the comic shop's obviously gonna buy that for me, and it'll be in my pull box. When I do go to the comic shop on Wednesday, what I notice is that the not, like top, because you put out like 70, 75, 80 books a month, DC. 60. When you add in like some of the other stuff, but it's like, whatever.
Okay.
You're putting out like 60 books, let's say. There, you have a top 20.
Right.
The comic shops order a bunch of those.
Right.
It's like all the Batman stuff and Superman and Green Lantern and Wonder Woman, all that kind of stuff. When you get to something like Martian Manhunter,
Yep.
when you get to some of these other kind of what we call like, the bottom half of that 60, they might only have 1 or 2 copies that go on the rack.
Yep.
And what's
And that, by the way, that's a good store.
Right. And that's a good store,
Yeah.
because a lot of them don't have any of those in the
Right.
rack. And what's interesting is that the Wednesday Warriors, it's like, I'll go out to the store on Wednesday, I'll pick my stuff up, and I'll look at the stuff on the rack. And a lot of times there's only 1 copy of the stuff, and if it's something that I haven't seen before, I'll flip through it, and if it's interesting to me, I'll buy it. Now,
Right.
if I buy the only copy, or if there's me and one other guy like me on Wednesday, and we buy the only 2 copies, that means that when you're experimenting with these different books that aren't the top ones,
Oh, yeah.
nobody is ever seeing those books because they're not racked by the comic shops. And most of these people aren't, I read previews every month.
Yeah.
So I know, and I'll pick original, like I know creators that I like, so I'll pre-order those things. But there's a lot of books out there that they're not selling, not necessarily because they're not good or because people wouldn't like them, but they're not selling because
People can't find them.
nobody ever sees the book to check it out, and it's sort of a thing with, like the non-returnable
Right.
thing. It works well for certain things, but comic shops are working on such tight margins that they're really not willing to take risks, because if they get stuck with 4 or 5 copies of 20 books every month, they can go out of business.
Well, and that's part of the biggest problem we're faced with right now. It's just raising that awareness. If we could put as much promotion as we want behind anything, but if there's no copies to be found, you're not going to sales, and by the time that person goes to the store, they go away, they might not come back again if they're looking for something. And that's a challenge we're fighting all the time, trying to work with the stores and work with everybody to get that done. That's probably the biggest battle right now, because it's hard. We're trying to invest to get people excited. That's why our confusing young adult line, our young adult and kid stuff in Zoom. That's out there right now. We're finally getting them into the Walmarts and the Targets. But they're in all the bookstores. And the Raven book we just did in the young adult line with County Garcia and Gabriel Piccolo. We've got over 110,000 copies in print on that book. That's
Scholastic.
what?
Was that with Scholastic?
No, that's us. That's DC.
That's you.
Yeah, that's just DC. And that's not even, there's no book fair in that.
Okay.
No, there's no Scholastic book fair in that. That is pure just selling that book. But also, this is what's stealth about that book. The artist on the book, Gabriel Piccolo, is an artist. This is the first time he's ever done interiors, but he is an Instagram sensation. He has 2.4 million followers on Instagram, and he never drew a single comic. Just did art, and the people reacted and excited by his art so much that they followed him. So this is being his first book. It's a real moment for us, and it was a risk to take him aboard, but we worked with him and could not be happy with that product, and now we're excited to see what his next project is going to be. But you know, there's a lot of new people out there. We're trying to find them and find the right voice for them. Yeah.
And it's honestly the best thing you guys did was the Walmart thing. I don't care what anybody else says.
I love those.
It was brilliant.
Yeah.
Because we need to get away from the Wednesday Warriors.
Yeah.
Because we're going to buy it anyway.
Yeah. And and they're going to be in the stores now too, so those guys get them. But the goal is to be in a place where you get foot traffic and somebody can pick it up as a more casual fan. Right there.
You're speaking about the artists for those DC Ink books.
Yeah.
How much of it was also that those writers had a built-in audience already, like Danielle Page, Lauren Miracle, Kemi Garcia? Even though they wrote prose, it was maybe their first time writing a graphic novel, but they had like a significant base already. Just trying to see what.
We believe, I think those guys gave us instant credibility getting into this market. Again, really big, really crowded marketplace with the young adult and growing exponentially every month because it's the one true growth spot in the book market. One of the real spots where you see expansion on. Young adult books are expanding. Manga is back in business again in a big way. That's up, but I think it's probably because there's about 2 or 3 key franchises really starting to pop. But with that, you're right. So what we did is we went out and got all those writers because they had respect. And where we get our biggest success sometimes is in the libraries. So when you get into a library, people like Kemi Garcia or Danielle Page, they are a known quantity, and the librarians trust their material, trust the work they do. So it's much easier to get a sell-in off their names. But usually when you do graphic novels, I have to say, you know, there's an old adage that good art can save a bad story, you know, but a good story can save bad art. And reality is when people open up these books, they're looking at that art, and if that art grabs you, we have a good chance to sell it. Yeah, I think the writing just brings them back from issue to issue, but I think the art buys it brings you in the first time. So I think that's what's helping over there. That's it. Any other questions? We got about 5 more minutes. Yes?
How do you find your writers?
What's that?
How do you find your writers?
Poorly. I was going to say poorly. It's an answer. It's a great question because we used to have a much simpler way of approaching writers. We're in a very strange spot in the business right now. And the spot of the business is right now is that the ability for people to create their own product, right, is easier than ever before. You can go online, you can do it online, you can Kickstarter, you can do things that you've never done before on your own, and you see more people doing that. And then you got an interesting young group of talent coming up right now that is basically looking at things like going on, creating Kickstarter or original product, or even worse, they look at The Walking Dead and say, I could create my own thing and make billions of dollars selling it out to everything else. You know, we see all these things being picked up. So the allure of people coming in because they were raised on superhero comics and just wanting to do that isn't as strong as it was before. And most of the talent we're getting right now is older. We're getting talent in their 30s and later rather than in their 20s coming out of college. It's just strange. It just shifted. So where do we find them? We find them from the work they've already published. So a lot of times we find them if they've done work for other companies. Because like I said, there's 500 comics out there, and we're scouring them to see if any names break out. You know, and we have all our editors looking, and we have a talent relations department looking, so we're always out there looking. And what we're doing now is more anthology books. I don't know if you've seen, we did the Dog Days of Summer. We do Nuclear Winter holiday special. We do a lot of crazy specials. We do those specials because we can sell them into a holiday, but more importantly, it gives you a chance to see if somebody can tell a story in 8 to 10 to 12 pages. Same thing with the Walmart books. The Walmart books, we're trying out new talent. So we're creating places to try out new talent, but how do you find them? We find them if they had a level of success somewhere else, and that's something that we think could translate back to our books. And if that person has interest in working on our comics, then we give them the opportunity. So that's where it is. No programs yet to do it. We did a talent program for a little while. It was a little tough. Didn't come together as well as I thought it would. But the reality is that it's been a pretty good thing, and we're always looking for new guys, always. So the question is always: is you had something published, to hand it to an editor and see if they like what you're doing, and then take it from there. Okay? Any other questions? Yes.
Two things. First of all, thank you for letting Second Coming after the fall.
Yeah.
Because I know you had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I love that book.
It's a great book, but
I'm not supposed to, but I really do.
I love Mark's stuff.
Yeah.
I'd like to see him on a bigger book.
But yeah, we're working. Actually, I was just with Mark 2 days ago, so it was kind of good. We were just chatting up some ideas. He's a real talent. And with a crazy point of view and a great voice. And I like voices because ultimately we can turn out any book we want, but to get a new perspective. You got to remember our characters are 80 years old, 60 years old, whatever one you look at it. But the truth be told is that the only reason why they stay viable and effective is because we keep on finding new people that can contextualize them in today's society and find ways to find a way to get their voice to relate to today's audience. And I think Mark's one of those guys. I think he's a really good writer on that. He just did for the Walmart books. He just did a Swamp Thing that could possibly be my favorite Swamp Thing since Len Wein. I like the Alan Moore stuff, but I like the monster Swamp Thing. So he really captured that monster Swamp Thing. It actually, in a weird way, felt like if I could use a reference, don't get me in trouble. It felt like a Steve Gerber Man Thing book, and which is for me is the pinnacle. Is the pinnacle, you know, for those horror comics. So it was a lot of fun. Any other questions? Any other? Oh, one more.
Oh, yeah, is there a way to start pushing for hemp paper?
What's that?
Hemp paper?
Hemp paper?
Yeah, get DC Comics made from hemp paper.
What is? I'm sorry. What is that?
Yeah, hemp paper.
Hemp paper?
Yeah, the DC Comics made for hemp paper.
I don't know. You know, it's what we do. It's funny you say that because we actually do look at different paper stocks. It's a, you know, we went, I don't know if you ever saw this, recently we've gone from a glossy paper to a more matted one because I feel that it captures the color better and it's easier to read. So we're always looking at different things, you know, along those lines. Okay, thanks. Any other questions? All right, okay, well listen, I think the next group is about to come in. I want to thank you all for joining me here. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate all the support on DC.